Daniel was just an ordinary boy, the kind of teenager who liked playing soccer with his friends and spending too much time on his phone. That day, he was walking home from school with his backpack slung over one shoulder. The sun was low in the sky, painting the streets with a warm golden glow. He took the longer route home, passing through the little shopping area near his neighborhood. It was always busy around that time. People finishing work, kids running about, and the smell of fresh bread drifting out from the bakery at the corner. As Daniel turned toward the small grocery store, he noticed something unusual. A small crowd had gathered near the entrance, but not the kind of crowd that came together for something good. The air felt tense. He slowed his steps and squinted, trying to understand what was going on. That's when he saw them. An elderly couple, perhaps in their late 70s, standing nervously with bags of groceries at their feet. They looked fragile, like the kind of grandparents who smiled at strangers and always had candy tucked away for kids. But now they weren't smiling. 3 young men stood around them, blocking their way. They weren't much older than Daniel, maybe in their early 20s, but they carried themselves with arrogance. One of them laughed loudly, mocking the way the old man held his cane. Another pointed at the woman's simple clothes, making cruel remarks that made the couple's faces flush with shame. Their voices were sharp and full of disrespect, cutting through the quiet evening air. Daniel's heart thudded in his chest. He had seen bullying before at school, and sometimes he had kept his head down, not wanting to get involved. But this was different. These weren't classmates arguing in a hallway. This was a helpless elderly couple being humiliated in front of strangers who mostly just walked past, pretending not to notice. Danny. Elle could see the fear in the old woman's eyes as she clutched her husband's arm tightly. The old man tried to speak up, his voice shaky, but the bullies only laughed louder. Daniel stopped in his tracks. His mind raced. He was just a boy. What could he do? Those men were older, stronger, and clearly enjoyed picking on people weaker than them. For a moment, he felt like walking away. It wasn't his problem after all. But as he watched the couple lower their heads, wishing the ground would swallow them up, something stirred inside him. It was as if a voice inside whispered, "If you don't step up now, who will?" He glanced around. A few other people had noticed what was happening, but nobody moved forward. Some avoided looking altogether, pretending to be too busy with their phones or shopping bags. The world seemed suddenly unfair. So many adults around, yet none willing to defend the elderly couple. That was when Daniel took a deep breath, tightened his grip on his backpack strap, and began walking toward them. Every step felt heavier than the last. He could hear the mocking laughter grow sharper as he got closer. His palms grew sweaty and his throat felt dry, but he kept moving. He didn't have a plan, didn't know exactly what he would say, but his feet refused to let him back away. The bullies were so caught up in their cruel game that they didn't notice Daniel at first. One of them snatched the old man's grocery bag, shaking it so that apples rolled across the pavement. People nearby gasped softly but still stayed back. Daniel's stomach churned with anger. That was enough. He quickened his pace, his voice rising louder than he expected. "Hey! Leave them alone!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the small parking lot. The 3 men turned sharply, surprised to see a boy standing there with such determination in his eyes. For a second, the air went silent. The elderly couple looked up, startled, their eyes wide with both fear and a glimmer of hope. Daniel felt his knees tremble, but he stood tall, forcing himself not to back down. One of the bullies smirked and stepped forward, towering over Daniel. "And what are you gonna do, kid?" he sneered. His friends laughed, but Daniel didn't look away. His voice was firm when he replied, "I'm going to make sure you stop bothering them." The bullies exchanged glances, clearly amused, but also unsettled by the boy's courage. Daniel's heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears, but he held his ground. The old man tightened his grip on his cane, and the old woman whispered something under her breath, maybe a prayer, maybe a thank you. For Daniel, time seemed to slow. In that moment, he wasn't just a boy walking home from school. He was someone who had chosen to step forward when everyone else stayed back. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he couldn't stand by and let cruelty win. And so, in the golden light of the evening, in front of strangers too afraid to act, Daniel made his choice: to protect the elderly couple, no matter what it cost him. Daniel stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his heartbeat echoing in his ears like the drums of war. The words had left his mouth before he even realized it. "Hey, leave them alone." It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. It just came out, as natural as breathing. But with it came a weight he had never felt before. Suddenly, all eyes in the area turned toward him, some curious, some surprised, and a few silently thankful. The bullies stopped laughing. The tallest one, broad-shouldered and wearing a leather jacket that looked too heavy for the warm day, took a slow step toward Daniel. He tilted his head, studying him like a cat might study a mouse. "You got guts, kid," he said in a low, mocking voice. His two friends chuckled behind him, as though the idea of a boy standing up to them was the funniest thing they had seen all week. Daniel's mouth went dry. He wanted to look away, maybe even turn and run, but something inside him refused. His legs wobbled, but his spirit held firm. He thought about the elderly man's trembling hands, about the way the old woman had clutched her husband's arm, her eyes silently begging someone, anyone, to step in. How could he just walk away now? He remembered something his father had once told him before he passed away. "Doing the right thing will never be easy, Daniel, but that's why it's the right thing." Those words came rushing back like a wave, filling Daniel with a strange mix of fear and courage. He realized this was one of those moments where his choice would define the kind of person he was going to be. The bully in the jacket smirked, leaning closer. "What are you, some kind of hero? You think they need you to protect them?" His words dripped with mockery, but Daniel noticed something in his tone. A flicker of irritation, maybe even surprise. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, especially not someone smaller and younger. Daniel's voice shook at first, but he forced himself to speak louder, stronger. "I don't care what you think of me, but you're not going to keep hurting them." His words cut through the air, sharper than he expected. For a brief second, silence hung between them. The old woman's eyes filled with tears, and the old man's grip on his cane tightened as if he were gathering strength from the boy's courage. The bystanders, who had been frozen in their own fear, now began to murmur quietly. Some lifted their phones, perhaps ready to record what was happening. The second bully, thinner but with a sharp, cruel face, scoffed. "You should mind your own business, kid. These old folks don't matter. Why risk getting yourself hurt?" That question burned in Daniel's mind. Why was he risking it? Why didn't he just walk away like everyone else? The answer came to him as clearly as the sunlight falling on the cracked pavement. Because it mattered. Because people mattered. If everyone stayed silent, the world would only get crueler. If he walked away, he'd never forgive himself. Daniel swallowed hard and straightened his shoulders. "They do matter," he said firmly. "More than you know. They've lived their whole lives and they deserve respect. Not this." His voice grew steadier with every word. "You should be ashamed." The bully's smirks faltered. It wasn't that Daniel was bigger or stronger. He wasn't. But there was a conviction in his voice, a fire in his eyes, that unsettled them. The crowd around the store began whispering louder, and a few even nodded in agreement. The atmosphere shifted, slowly turning against the bullies. Inside, Daniel's heart still raced, and fear clung to him like a shadow. He knew they could lash out at him at any moment. They were stronger, older, and far more intimidating, but he also knew something else. Backing down now would be worse than any punch they could throw. The elderly man, his voice trembling but filled with quiet pride, finally spoke. "Leave the boy alone. He's braver than the three of you put together." The old woman nodded, her eyes fixed on Daniel as if he were her only hope in that moment. Daniel felt a strange surge of strength at their words. His fear didn't vanish, but it transformed into something else, resolve. He was no longer thinking about himself. He was thinking about them. He was thinking about doing the right thing, no matter the cost. The leader of the bullies narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed. For a long moment it seemed like he might hit Daniel or shove him aside. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and a few people even shouted, "Leave them alone!" The pressure was mounting, and Daniel's stance, shaking though it was, stood like a barrier they hadn't expected. That was the turning point. For the first time, the bullies realized they had lost control of the situation. Their fun had been interrupted, not by another adult, but by a boy whose courage outshined their cruelty. And in that moment, Daniel knew one thing for certain. He had made his decision. He would not step back. He would not let fear win. He would stand there for as long as it took until the couple was safe. And though his heart pounded like a drum, a quiet thought settled inside him. Sometimes, even one voice is enough to silence many. The street seemed to freeze. For a few seconds, there was no sound except the faint rustling of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Daniel stood face to face with the tallest bully, his small frame a sharp contrast to the man's broad shoulders and intimidating presence. Yet Daniel did not move back. His shoes were planted firmly on the ground, his fists clenched, and his eyes locked on the men who had been humiliating the elderly couple. The leader tilted his head, his jaw tightening as he looked at Daniel. He stepped closer until Daniel could smell the strong mix of cologne and cigarette smoke on his jacket. "You've got a big mouth for a little kid," he muttered, his voice low and threatening. His friends laughed again, but this time the laughter didn't echo with as much confidence. It was uneasy, forced. Daniel's chest rose and fell quickly. His heart pounded so hard it felt like everyone around could hear it. He was terrified, but something deeper than fear anchored him in place. He thought of the couple behind him. The woman's wrinkled hand was still clutching the old man's sleeve, her eyes wide with both fear and desperate hope. If Daniel backed down now, what message would that send? That cruelty wins? That silence is safer than courage? No, he wouldn't allow that. "Why don't you just walk away?" Daniel said, his voice surprisingly steady, though his throat was tight. "Leave them alone. They've done nothing to you." The bully's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it looked as though he would shove Daniel to the ground. His friend, the thinner one with sharp features, leaned against the store wall and smirked. "This kid thinks he's some kind of hero. Maybe we should teach him a lesson." Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. A few people pulled out their phones, pointing their cameras toward the scene. Someone whispered, "Call the police." Boss. But no one moved. It was Daniel who stood there, the only barrier between cruelty and kindness. The tension was unbearable. Daniel's knees shook, but he forced himself to straighten his back and look the bully directly in the eyes. "If you want to do something," he said, "then do it to me. But you're not going to touch them again." His words landed heavier than he expected. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. The elderly man slowly straightened his back, his pride restored by the boy's bravery. He lifted his cane slightly, as if to say he wasn't afraid anymore. The old woman whispered something softly, too faint for Daniel to hear, but it sounded like a prayer of thanks. The leader clenched his jaw, visibly torn between his anger and the growing weight of the crowd's attention. Bullies thrived on silence, on the helplessness of their victims. But now, with this boy standing tall and people beginning to watch closely, their power was slipping away. The thinner friend suddenly pushed himself off the wall and stepped closer to Daniel. He bent slightly, his face only inches away. "You really think you can stop us, huh? You're shaking, kid. We can see it." Daniel's voice cracked for a moment, but then it grew stronger. "I'm not shaking because I'm weak. I'm shaking because I care. That's something you'll never understand." The bully blinked, taken aback. The smirk on his face faltered. He wasn't used to answers like that, especially from someone so young. The leader let out a sharp breath, clearly frustrated. He turned to glance at the crowd, noticing more people filming now. He cursed under his breath. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. They had wanted an easy target, a bit of fun at the expense of an old couple. But now, thanks to this boy, the spotlight was on them. And in that spotlight, they looked smaller, uglier, weaker. One of the bystanders, a middle-aged man in a work uniform, finally found his voice. "Yeah, leave them alone! The kid's right!" he shouted. A few others joined in, their voices gaining confidence. "Stop bothering them! Go somewhere else!" The murmurs were turning into a chorus of disapproval, and the bullies could feel the pressure mounting. Daniel's fear slowly turned into something else, a strange, quiet confidence. He realized he wasn't alone anymore. His courage had sparked something in the crowd, and even though he was still terrified, he felt stronger knowing others were beginning to stand with him. The leader let out a humorless laugh and shoved his hands into his pockets. "This isn't worth it," he muttered, glaring at Daniel one last time. "But remember this, kid, you don't know who you're messing with." With that, he motioned to his friends, and the three of them backed away, muttering curses under their breath as they disappeared down the street. The tension broke like a string snapping, and the air seemed to lighten. The elderly couple immediately stepped forward. The old woman's eyes were brimming with tears as she touched Daniel's arm gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for standing up for us." The old man nodded, his weathered face filled with pride. "You're a brave young man," he said, "braver than most adults I've ever met." The crowd slowly dispersed, some clapping, others patting Daniel on the shoulder as they walked away. A few stopped their recordings, already whispering about the boy who had stood up when no one else would. Daniel exhaled deeply, his body finally realizing how tense it had been. His knees felt weak, but in his heart, a new strength had taken root. He hadn't just confronted bullies, he had discovered the power of courage, even when fear was at its strongest. And though he didn't know it yet, that choice, to step forward, to confront, to protect, was about to change his life in ways he could never imagine. The tension in the air slowly dissolved after the bullies walked away, their swagger fading into the distance like shadows that had finally been chased off by light. The little crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but not without a few murmurs, nods of respect, and even a few pats on Daniel's back. Some whispered things like, "That kid's brave," and "I wouldn't have had the guts to do that." For Daniel, though, the attention didn't matter. His eyes were fixed on the elderly couple standing before him, their groceries scattered across the pavement. The woman bent down shakily, trying to gather the apples that had rolled out of the torn bag. Her hands trembled so much that one of the fruits slipped right back onto the ground. Daniel quickly knelt down beside her, picking it up and placing it carefully back into the bag. "It's okay, ma'am," he said softly, his voice gentler now. "I'll help you." Her eyes welled with tears. She looked at him for a long moment, as though she couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Her lips quivered, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked. You didn't have to do that, son. You could have been hurt." Daniel offered a small smile, though his heart was still racing from the confrontation. "I couldn't just walk away," he replied. "No one should treat you like that." The old man, tall but slightly hunched from age, leaned on his cane and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. His grip was firm, carrying the weight of gratitude words couldn't express. "Most people would have kept walking," he said quietly. "But you stood up when it mattered." His voice was thick with emotion, and his eyes glistened. Together, they began collecting the rest of the groceries. A few bystanders bent down to help as well, their guilt perhaps nudging them into action now that the danger had passed. In minutes, the apples, bread, and cans of soup were back in their bags. The old woman adjusted her scarf, still shaking, and then reached into her purse. She pulled out a small wallet, fumbling as though in a hurry. "Please, let me give you something," she insisted, pulling out a few folded bills. "It's the least we can do for you. You saved us from—" Her voice trailed off, her hands still trembling as she held out the money. Daniel shook his head immediately and stepped back. "No, please, I don't want your money. I just did what anyone should have done." "Not everyone would have done it," the old man said firmly. He slipped the money back into his wife's purse and shook his head at her. Then, turning to Daniel, he added, "Courage can't be bought. What you showed today is worth more than anything we could give you." The old woman's eyes filled again, and she reached out, cupping Daniel's cheek with her wrinkled hand. Her touch was warm, gentle, the kind of touch only a grandmother could give. "You remind me of my grandson," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He passed away a few years ago. He was brave, just like you." A tear rolled down her cheek, and Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being compared to anyone's grandson, let alone being thanked in such a heartfelt way. He looked down for a moment, shuffling his feet, then glanced back up with a shy smile. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said softly, "but I'm glad I could help today." The old man nodded, his expression serious. "You didn't just help, son. You gave us back our dignity. That's something no one has done for us in a long time." His words carried a weight that sank deep into Daniel's chest. They stood there for a while, 3 generations connected by a single act of kindness. Around them, life in the town went on. Cars drove past, people walked in and out of the store. But for Daniel and the Thompsons, as he later learned their names, the world felt still. Finally, the old man cleared his throat. "At least let us walk with you a bit," he said. "We live not far from here. It'll give us peace of mind." Daniel chuckled lightly, adjusting the straps on his backpack. "I'm fine, really. But if you want, I'll carry these bags for you." Without waiting for a reply, he picked up the heavier of the 2 grocery bags and held it firmly. "You shouldn't be carrying all this anyway." The old woman let out a soft laugh through her tears. "Such a gentleman," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. As they walked slowly down the street together, the old couple asked Daniel about school, about his family, about what he wanted to be when he grew up. He answered modestly, saying he liked science and maybe wanted to be a doctor one day. They smiled at his words, nodding as though they saw something special in him. By the time they reached their modest little home, the sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the street. Daniel handed them their groceries and started to turn away, but the old man stopped him. "What's your name, son?" "Daniel," he answered. The old man nodded thoughtfully, repeating the name as if he wanted to memorize it. "Daniel, we won't forget what you did today." The woman added softly, "God bless you, Daniel. May life reward you for your kindness." Daniel gave them a small wave, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment from their praise. "I just did what was right," he said simply. Then he walked off toward home, the warmth of their gratitude still lingering like sunlight in his chest. What he didn't know was that the couple truly meant I, and when they said they wouldn't forget. That night, as Daniel lay in bed replaying the scene over and over, the Thompsons were making a decision of their own, one that would bring an unexpected twist into his life the very next day. That evening, after Daniel helped the Thompsons carry their groceries home and said goodbye, he walked back to his own small house with a strange feeling in his chest. The streets were quiet now. The shops had closed, and the golden glow of the setting sun had faded into the deep purple of twilight. He could still hear echoes of the confrontation in his mind, the mocking laughter of the bullies, his own trembling voice as he told them to stop, the murmurs of the crowd, and finally, the gentle words of gratitude from the elderly couple. For a boy his age, it was a lot to take in. He wasn't used to being the center of anyone's attention. Most days, he blended in, just another face in the crowd at school. But today had been different. Today, he had chosen not to blend in. He had stepped forward, and that choice lingered in his heart like a flame that refused to go out. When he reached home, his mother was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup. The smell of onions and garlic filled the small house, wrapping it in warmth. She looked up as Daniel walked in. "You're late," she said gently, not scolding but curious. "Everything all right?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to worry her, so he gave a small shrug and said, "I just helped someone with their groceries." It wasn't a lie, Not exactly, but it wasn't the full truth either. His mother smiled, clearly satisfied with the answer, and turned back to her cooking. At the dinner table, Daniel pushed his food around on his plate more than he ate it. His mind was elsewhere. He thought about the Thompsons, the way Mrs. Thompson's eyes had filled with tears when she thanked him, the way Mr. Thompson had gripped his shoulder with surprising strength. He thought about their words. "We won't forget what you did today." At the time, he hadn't given it much weight, but now, sitting in the quiet hum of his own home, those words felt heavier, as though they carried some hidden meaning. After dinner, Daniel went to his small room. Posters of soccer players decorated the walls, and his school books were stacked untidily on his desk. He sat on his bed, replaying the day over and over. He remembered how scared he had been, how badly his knees had shaken, and yet how strong he had felt when he realized he couldn't walk away. He thought of the crowd, of people whispering, recording, finally speaking up because he had spoken first. A strange mixture of pride and unease washed over him. "What if they come back?" he whispered to himself, thinking of the bullies. He pushed the thought away, telling himself it was unlikely. They had walked off, defeated and embarrassed. Maybe they would forget about it by tomorrow. Still, a small knot of worry stayed in his stomach. Later that night, as the house grew still and his mother went to bed, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His room was lit only by the soft glow of the streetlight outside his window. Normally, he would drift off to sleep easily after a day at school, but tonight was different. His body was tired, but his mind was restless. Every sound seemed louder, the ticking of the clock, the faint creak of the house settling, even the distant bark of a dog. He turned over, hugging his pillow, and whispered again, "I just did the right thing, that's all." Saying it out loud made him feel calmer. Slowly, his eyelids grew heavy, and eventually, sleep pulled him under. But while Daniel slept peacefully, events were already in motion elsewhere. In a quiet home across town, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were still awake, sitting at their small kitchen table. The groceries Daniel had helped carry were neatly stored away, but their minds were far from calm. Mrs. Thompson's hands were wrapped around a cup of tea, her eyes thoughtful. "That boy," she murmured, shaking her head in wonder. "So young, yet braver than anyone else there. We can't just let this go." Her husband, leaning back in his chair, nodded slowly. "I know. Daniel is special. Most would have stayed silent, but he stood for us without hesitation. His gaze was firm, and his voice carried weight. We need to do something for him, something meaningful." They spoke quietly into the night, their words careful, almost secretive. There was more to the Thompsons than they appeared. Daniel didn't know it, but the couple wasn't just an ordinary elderly pair. Mr. Thompson, in his younger years, had built strong connections, people who respected him, people who owed him favors, people who could still make things happen. By the time the clock struck midnight, their decision had been made. Tomorrow, someone would pay Daniel a visit. Someone who would arrive in a way the boy would never expect. Meanwhile, in his little room, Daniel shifted in his sleep, unaware of what was coming. He dreamed lightly, flashes of the day mixing with strange images, a black car gliding silently down his street, voices he didn't recognize, and a knock at his front door. He stirred, but didn't wake. The night passed quietly, but it wasn't an ordinary night. It was the calm before something new, something bigger, something that would change the course of his simple life. And as dawn broke, painting the sky with soft orange light, Daniel had no idea that the day ahead would begin with the low hum of an engine and the sight of a sleek black SUV pulling up in front of his home. The morning sunlight spilled gently through Daniel's window, casting soft patterns on the wall. Birds chirped outside, and for a moment, the world felt normal. He yawned, stretched his arms, and rubbed his sleepy eyes. It was Saturday, and that meant no school. Usually, Saturdays were his favorite. He could sleep in, play soccer with his friends, or just relax at home. But as Daniel pulled on his t-shirt and walked into the kitchen, he noticed something different about the day. His mother was already awake, sipping tea by the window. Her expression was thoughtful, almost uneasy. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, smiling faintly. "Sleep well?" Daniel nodded and grabbed a piece of toast. "Yeah, I had some weird dreams, though," he admitted. He didn't tell her what he dreamed about, the black car, the mysterious voices, because he didn't think it mattered. Dreams were just dreams after all. But fate, as he would soon learn, had a strange way of turning dreams into reality. Around mid-morning, Daniel was in the small front yard, kicking his worn-out soccer ball against the wall. The steady thud-thud-thud of the ball hitting bricks echoed through the quiet neighborhood. A couple of neighbors were out watering their plants, and a dog barked lazily across the street. Everything felt ordinary, until it didn't. The sound came first. A low, powerful hum that grew louder as it approached. Daniel paused, his foot resting on the ball, and looked down the street. From the corner, a sleek black SUV appeared, its polished surface gleaming under the sunlight. It wasn't the kind of car people usually drove around his neighborhood. Most cars were old sedans or beat-up trucks. This SUV looked expensive, important, and out of place. Daniel's brow furrowed. The vehicle rolled slowly down the street, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. Neighbors turned their heads, curiosity flashing in their eyes. Even the barking dog went quiet, sensing something unusual. The SUV came to a stop directly in front of Daniel's house. The engine purred for a moment before shutting off. The silence that followed was thick, almost too heavy for the sunny morning. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. His mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes widened when she saw the black SUV. She glanced at Daniel, then back at the car. Do you know anyone who drives something like that?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, I've never seen that car before." For a few seconds, nothing happened. The SUV just sat there, sleek and silent, like a predator waiting for the right moment. Then, the doors clicked open. Out stepped two men dressed in dark suits. They weren't dressed like policemen, nor did they look like ordinary visitors. Their shoes were polished, their ties neat, and their faces calm but unreadable. One of them adjusted his sunglasses, scanning the street before focusing his gaze on Daniel. The neighbors watched from their yards, whispering quietly. A few even pulled out their phones, pretending to be busy but clearly recording. Everyone wanted to know what was going on. Why would such an expensive vehicle, with such official-looking men, stop at the home of an ordinary boy and his mother? Daniel's throat went dry. His first thought was the bullies. Could they have sent someone after him? But these men didn't look like thugs. They looked important, too important. One of the suited men walked up the path toward the house, his footsteps measured and steady. He stopped a few feet away from Daniel and offered a polite but serious nod. "You must be Daniel," he said in a deep, calm voice. Daniel froze. Yeah," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression softened slightly. "We're here to speak with you and your mother. May we come in?" His mother's eyebrows knitted together in confusion. She stepped closer, placing a protective hand on Daniel's shoulder. "What is this about?" she asked firmly. Her voice carried both suspicion and worry. The second man, who had remained near the SUV, finally spoke. "We were sent by Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he said plainly. "They asked us to deliver a message to your son." The mention of the Thompsons made Daniel's heart jolt. His mind flashed back to the previous day, the bullies, the confrontation, the couple's gratitude. He remembered Mr. Thompson's steady voice saying, "We won't forget what you did today." Suddenly, it all connected. Daniel looked up at his mother, who was just as puzzled. She exchanged a glance with him, then slowly nodded. "All right," she said cautiously. "You can come inside." The men followed them into the modest living room. Their polished shoes looked almost out of place against the worn carpet and simple furniture. One of them carried a slim black folder tucked under his arm. They sat down politely, their posture straight, their movements deliberate. Daniel and his mother sat across from them, the boy's heart racing with both excitement and fear. The man without sunglasses placed the folder gently on the coffee table. "Your son did something remarkable yesterday," he began. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson witnessed it themselves, and they believe that kind of bravery should not go unnoticed." Daniel blinked, unsure of what to say. His mother looked at him with surprise, as though she were hearing this for the first time. The man leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "What you did may seem small to you, Daniel, but it meant everything to them, and because of that, today marks the beginning of something new in your life." Daniel's stomach flipped. His mother's grip on his hand tightened. The room suddenly felt heavier, filled with questions that hung in the air, unanswered. And as the men exchanged a knowing glance before opening the folder, Daniel realized one thing. This wasn't just a thank you visit. Whatever the Thompsons had set in motion was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The room was so quiet that Daniel could hear the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. His mother sat stiffly beside him, her hand still wrapped protectively around his. Across from them, the two suited men sat like statues, calm and deliberate in every movement. One of them placed the sleek black folder on the coffee table, flipping it open slowly, as though what lay inside carried great weight. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes darting between the folder and the man's unreadable face. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His mother's brow furrowed in suspicion. "What is this all about?" she asked firmly. The man without sunglasses finally spoke. His voice was deep, steady, almost reassuring. "Yesterday, your son showed courage that most adults fail to show. He stood up when others stayed silent. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson were deeply moved by that, and they wanted you both to know who they really are." Daniel's eyes widened. Who they really are? He thought back to the couple, frail, gentle, carrying their groceries with shaking hands. What could possibly be so special about them? The man slid a glossy photograph across the table. Daniel picked it up carefully. It showed Mr. Thompson many years younger, standing in a military uniform, saluting in front of a line of decorated soldiers. His chest was covered with medals. He looked strong, authoritative, nothing like the slightly bent man Daniel had helped the day before. "That's Mr. Thompson in his prime," the man explained. "He served as a decorated officer and later worked in international security. Even after retirement, he maintained strong connections with people who respected him greatly. He is not just an ordinary man." Daniel stared at the picture, his mouth slightly open. His mind struggled to connect the humble old man he'd met with the commanding figure in the photo. The man in sunglasses added quietly, "The Thompsons have lived quietly for years, but they are well known in certain circles. People who cross them, people who disrespect them. Let's just say it doesn't go unnoticed. Yesterday, when you stepped in, Daniel, you didn't just protect two vulnerable people. You unknowingly protected two people who hold influence far beyond this neighborhood." Daniel's mother shifted uncomfortably. "Influence? What exactly are you saying? Why come here in a black SUV like this? You're scaring us." The first man held up his hand gently. "We don't mean to cause fear. Quite the opposite. We're here because the Thompsons wanted to show gratitude in a way that truly matters. They believe Daniel deserves opportunities, doors opened that might otherwise remain closed." He reached into the folder again and pulled out a sealed envelope, sliding it across the table toward Daniel. The boy hesitated, then glanced at his mother. She gave a small nod, and together they opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in neat script. Daniel began reading aloud, his voice quiet but steady. "Dear Daniel, yesterday you reminded us of something the world often forgets, that courage still exists, even in the young. You defended us when others stayed silent, and for that we are deeply grateful. We have lived long enough to know that small acts of bravery can change the course of a life, and we believe yours is a life worth changing. Accept this as a token of our gratitude, not as payment, but as an invitation to a brighter future. With respect, Thomas Evelyn Thompson." By the time Daniel finished, his hands trembled slightly. He looked up at his mother, who sat frozen, her lips pressed tightly together as her eyes glistened. "What does this mean?" she whispered. The man without sunglasses answered calmly. "It means they want to invest in him. Education, opportunities, mentorship. They've arranged for Daniel to be included in a scholarship program run by people they trust. It's more than financial support. It's guidance, a network, a path forward." Daniel blinked in disbelief. Scholarship? For me?" His voice cracked slightly. No one had ever spoken of his future in such grand terms before. He had dreams, yes, becoming a doctor, making his mother proud. But those dreams always felt distant, almost impossible with their modest life. And now, out of nowhere, this door was opening. The suited men exchanged a glance, then nodded. "Yes, for you. They saw something in you yesterday that cannot be taught. Integrity, courage, and compassion. Those qualities are rare, and they believe you deserve to be rewarded for them." Daniel's mother finally spoke, her voice filled with both caution and awe. This is a lot. Why would they do all this for my son?" The man in sunglasses leaned forward slightly. "Because your son didn't ask for anything in return. He helped them without expecting a reward. That kind of character is what they value most, and now they want to make sure he has everything he needs to succeed in life." Daniel sat silently, his mind spinning. He thought back to the moment when he had stood in front of the bullies, terrified but determined. At the time, it had felt like a small, instinctive act, just doing what was right. But now, sitting in his living room with two mysterious men in suits and a black SUV waiting outside, he realized that single moment had rippled outward, changing everything. The first man closed the folder, stood up, and straightened his tie. "We'll leave you to think about it. But know this, the Thompsons don't make empty promises. They truly mean to stand by your side. The next steps are yours to take." As they walked back toward the SUV, neighbors still peeked through curtains and whispered, wondering what kind of visit could make a boy and his mother look both stunned and overwhelmed. Daniel stood at the window, watching the sleek vehicle pull away, the sunlight glinting off its surface until it disappeared around the corner. He turned to his mother, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, everything is going to change, isn't it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears dampening his hair. Finally, she whispered back, "Yes, Daniel, everything is about to change." And for the first time, Daniel realized the weight of what he had done. He hadn't just protected two strangers. He had unknowingly opened a door to a future brighter than he ever imagined.